We're doing our Grassland Fungi training course, and you might have done the Waxcap watch survey before, which is very much focused on the colour of different species, but today we're going to be going a step further and actually thinking about what individual species we've got. So we can see that we've got this kind of orangey brown Waxcap here, and so we're going to be thinking about what species we've actually got and what features of this fungal fruiting body make it that species. So we've got two different examples here of what are probably the same species, but you can see they look a little bit different. That's partly due to just natural variation that you get within a species. So think about it, within humans, not every person looks the same. A lot of us look very different, and the same goes for fungi. Part of that is just variations within the species, and some of it is due to environmental differences. So this one is smaller, it's probably got tucked into the moss a bit more. This one is probably a bit older, might have got a bit rained on and washed out colour-wise. But we can look at them in more detail and then use those features to help us determine whether they are indeed the same species or whether we have got some differences here between these two Waxcaps that are close together. For doing the Waxcap watch survey that is colour-based, for that we don't need to pick any of the fungi, we just need to observe them. You might want to get up a little bit close to them and see what colours you've actually got and what sizes they are, because you do need to fill that in for some of the questions. But after that we can just leave them where they are, let them release their spores and carry on reproducing. But when we're identifying to species level, some of the features that we need to look at on these fungi are very difficult for us to see while they're still super in close to the ground like this. So in that case we do pick the fungi, and this helps us to look at those features more closely. We try and pick a small amount as we can to identify it. Lots of our Waxcap species are quite rare, and so we want to help them stay as strong and resilient as possible. So we pick the minimum amount that we need to, but picking to help us identify the species is okay. So today we've got these two different Waxcaps here, probably the same species, but in a minute we'll pick one and have a look at those features and see what species we think it is. So what we could see when they were in the grass was the caps, the top of the fungi. And so we've got this kind of orangey brown colour. Now you can see it is a lot darker on this smaller one here. And I think that's just mainly because in this one, you can kind of see at the centre of the cap where it did have a darker colour to start off with. I think it's just got washed out because of the rain and some of the cold temperatures. So I think these originally would have been much more similar in colour. So we've got our kind of orangey brown colour, that's our first piece of evidence. So if we turn them over, you can see the gills of these fungi, and so these are the spore forming parts of the fungus. So all in these sections here is where they form their spores, and then those drop out as to help them reproduce. And looking at these gills is another identification feature for us. So you can see they are quite widely spaced, especially you can see in this bigger one. Although it's a bit of a funny shape, you can see they are quite far apart, and they're quite waxy in texture. The other thing we look at is how the gills are actually attached to the stem, which you might sometimes hear as being called a stipe. They're just different words for the same thing, which is this part of the fungus that it then attaches into the ground with. And so what we want to look at is how the gills actually attach to that stem. And so depending on what species you're looking at, they might attach in different ways. And so you might see gills described as decurrent, adnext, adnate. They're all different words for how the gills actually attach. And so this is where we have to look really closely at this feature to see how they might attach. You can see that the gills they're attached to the stem, and they actually travel slightly down it. So so this is what we would call decurrent. It's not quite as clear in these ones as it might be in some examples. You can kind of see it here where the gills travel actually down the stem. You might find it helpful to actually cut or break your fruit body in half so that you can actually see the edge of a gill and how it's attaching to the stem. But it's worth looking at those to help you identify to species. The next things we can look at in terms of the gills and the stem is the actual colour of them. So we've looked at the colour of our caps, and we've gone with their kind of this orangey brown kind of colour. in this case, we then want to look at the colour of the gills and the stem. So we say they are white, cream here, and similar in this one. So it's slightly darker stem and maybe slightly darker on the gills, but much lighter than the colour of the cap. And then we can also look at the texture of the fruit body as a whole. So these are relatively dry, the stems are quite dry. It's worth having a think about whether it's rained recently or not in terms of the texture that you're looking at, because that might affect how it feels in your hand. But these, it's not been raining this morning. These are quite dry. The tops of the caps have got a slightly waxy texture, but overall they're quite dry feeling. And so those are all the kinds of features that you can look at and that we've talked about in the course of how you might combine all of those as your evidence as to what species there are. So looking at all these features, I think these are Meadow Waxcaps. We've got that dry orange cap, we've got a much paler stem and gills, decurrent gills, and all of those bits of evidence combined makes me think that these are Meadow Waxcaps. They're quite a common species, you'd see them in quite a lot of places. Sometimes they'd be a lot larger than this. You can find really big Meadow Waxcaps, really quite chunky ones. And they're one of the few that can be really large. So a nice species that we found today in our cemetery.